Hi guys, welcome to week 20 of Vivas. And today our question is, what can we learn about medieval society by examining their houses? So, although we often tend to misread the medieval mind and give it modern impulses, the physical reality of the medieval world offers us an important um, and useful corrective to this view of the past. Um, the physical medieval home reveals an enormous amount about just how different the medieval world was from ours. So basically, um, this thesis can be summed up in a quote from L.P. Hartley, who says, quote, "The past is a different country. They do things differently there. So if you've ever traveled out of the United States, you can clearly see there's a lot of things that are different, and we often are really shocked by them because we're so used to how we do things in the United States. But going to the past is the same thing, basically. You are in culture shock because you're like, what? The rest of the world doesn't do this? So, yeah. The three things that we can learn about the medieval society by examining their homes is first, there was social hierarchy. Second, there was an impact of political and economic instability on the peasants. And third, there was a different rhythm in the medieval life. And yeah, so those are the 3 points. So our first point is that by examining their homes, we can see that the idea of social hierarchy was pervasive. So, a few weeks ago, we talked about this idea of the stairs to heaven and how everything is on different stair step. So rocks are like at the bottom, and then you have like the poor people, and then like royalty, and then like the godly people in the church, and then you have like angels and all that, and it basically goes all the way up to like heaven and God, which is the highest level. So there's this idea in medieval life of social hierarchy, and we can see this in everything about medieval life, from the food, the clothing, all the way to the materials that they built their houses with. So the hierarchy of food can be found in the larder, which is the medieval equivalent of a pantry. And the class, they thought back then that class determined how your body worked, which is hilarious because obviously that's not true. But they thought that like the more refined, like rich people had like a very delicate stomach, so they had to have this like very fine, like the flour that they had to be very fine. The meat that they ate was like this venison. So yeah, and the peasants, they had more of like a rough and coarse diet because they were obviously a lower class, and their stomachs were less delicate. So yeah, that's hierarchy in the food, and then we can see hierarchy in these sumptuary laws, which basically governed the medieval people's lives by giving them laws about what clothing they could or could not wear according to their class. So the earliest sumptuary laws, they governed clothing of the kind of discriminated against class. So the church basically said that the lepers, the Jews, and a lot of the diseased people, they had to wear certain clothing so everyone in society could more easily pick them out and like discriminate against them. So yeah, that was the first sumptuary laws, and then later sumptuary laws developed to more determine the clothing you could wear according to your class. So for the royalty, they could wear ermines, but this was off limits to any peasants. And an ermine is like an animal, Kind of looks like a bunny, except without the ears. It's usually white, and this was a symbol, as legend told, that the ermine was that the ermine would rather die than be defiled. So this became a symbol of royal purity, and so only the royal people were allowed to wear ermines. So yeah, that's the hierarchy in their clothing, and then lastly, the hierarchy in their food, in their homes. For peasants, timber was completely off limits, and the people that were allowed to have timber would use it to show off their wealth. So you'll see kind of like in very I don't know what the word is. It Tudor style homes. I know we call them Tudor style homes in our neighborhood, but it's like the timber is like the whole house is not made of timber, but it's like the borders or whatever. So it like you can see it all around the house. I'm not explaining this well at all. Just go look it up. But peasants had to use coppiced wood, which meant that this wood was cut back in fall time and would slowly grow sprouts during spring, and then they would cut it off again in spring, and it'd be kind of like thin, flexible wood that they could make their houses out of. Christopher Dreyer says that some peasants enjoyed the rights of houseboat, entitling them to take some building timber from the Lord's wood. But the quantities of timber taken were rarely enough to build a house. So some peasants were allowed to use the timber, but it was very regulated, and you wouldn't see a peasant's house that was made out of all timber. And if you did disobey these laws, you'd get killed, hung, just for taking some wood. What a harsh time to live. So then we see the impact of political and economic instability on the peasants. So peasants didn't have castles like the rich people. They didn't have moats and towers to defend them, so they were forced to live in close proximity for their security. So their houses were often multi-generational, and it was just one room, and it was filled with both people and animals. So everyone was kept safe in the house. And for warmth and protection, everyone usually shared the same bed in the medieval peasant's house. So Roger E. Kirch tells us that, quote, inadequate bedding meant families in the lower ranks, you routinely shared one single mattress with overnight guests included, end quote. And then Roger E. Kirch says later, quote, Italian proverbs say, in a narrow bed, get thee in the middle. So we can see this evidence of people, obviously a lot of people sleeping together in the same bed for warmth and protection. And also the animals would be kept in the house because you wouldn't want someone to be able to steal your cow and your pig, so you'd all kind of sleep in the same one room. And the most famous example of a co-sleeping bed is the bed of Ware, which we still have today, and this bed was designed to hold up to 15 people. Can you imagine 15 people sleeping in a bed? How uncomfortable that would be. That was the life of the medieval people. And this bed was not only like just a place to sleep, it was this key part of life because you would watch your mom give birth on the bed, and you would watch your grandpa die on the bed, and it was a very like symbolic place for life and death. So I guess you could say bed was an archetype. I don't know. Anyway, so the third thing that that the medieval home tells us about is that there were different rhythm in the medieval life and their sleep patterns. So, as we kind of talked about before with the whole co-sleeping thing, there was a lot of the lack of privacy. So moms would have their kids have their give birth in the same bed that their other kids were sleeping in. And this was just normal. So yeah, that was just a lot of lack of privacy. But another thing that Roger E. Kirch tells us in his book about the medieval sleeping patterns is that before artificial light, the rhythm of sleep was drastically different. Because if you think about it, today we can just turn on our light if we're gonna stay up later than sunset, and we have light, and we don't have to fumble around in the dark. But back then, if you had no light, there was no way you were staying up just sitting in the dark. Like, you just went to bed because that makes sense to do. So people would go to bed around sunset, and then they would wake up in the middle of the night at like midnight, and be up, and then they'd go back to bed. So there was 2 phases of sleeping, not just one 8-hour long bedtime. So this was referred to as the first and second sleep. And Roger E. Kirch says, quote, both phases of sleep lasted roughly the same length of time. Individuals waking sometime after midnight before returning to rest. So yeah, you'd have a little period of time where you'd wake up and you'd do sing songs or do something, and then you'd go back to bed. And Chaucer, we can see example of this in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in the Squire's Tale, where he talks about one of the characters sleeping after evening fell, and then waking up after her first sleep, and her companions who went to bed after her, how they lay asleep till daylight. So yeah, the medieval we can learn about medieval society through examining their homes, and we can learn 3 things: that there was social hierarchy, there was an impact of political and economic instability, and there was a different rhythm for day and night of the peasants. Okay, thanks for watching this 13-minute long video. How's this 13 minutes long? I'm so sorry, whoever has to grade this. I hope you did it on double speed. Guys, have a great whatever day this is, and stay hydrated. I don't know. Okay, bye.